WOHORO NDOHHO,
Yeah, hi.
CEO of Sandbox and former Director General of the Public Debt Management Office at the National Treasury. Welcome again to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Asante sana.
And the last time you were here in person, I wasn't here in person. But the previous time we spoke, it was on phone.
Correct.
Karibu sana. Sandbox. I don't even know why I'm pronouncing it as Sandbox because
It's a sandbox.
because you don't write it as Sandbox.
We got
You don't
rid of the
just don't
vowels.
like vowels.
That's right.
Sandbox.
It's like a sandbox capital.
Yeah, Sandbox capital.
That's right.
Okay. We want to talk about the election. So we are seeing what's happening. We now are seeing new governors who are being announced, even those that are retaining their seat, who are going to be less than 50% of the new of the governors. Of the 47 governors, more than 50% are going to be new.
Yes.
And this is something that's going to be big.
Yes.
So they're coming in, they have their own fresh ideas. Of course, we're going to have a fresh crop of MCAs across all the counties.
Right.
We are going to have more than 50% new members of the National Assembly and Senate. And we are definitely going to have a new president. So new coat and shirt and trousers plus the tie, if you throw it in. Okay?
That's right.
And then we call ourselves Kenya, and we continue managing the economy that we have inherited. There are issues.
As always.
Eh?
As always.
Okay. First of all, looking at what has been promised by all the candidates, right? Do you feel that any of them actually understood where our economy is at present and where it needs to go?
Short answer is they should. Whether they will, I think if you look at it, in a sense, this is probably the perfect time for all of us as citizens to go back to these manifestos. Because one or the other, we have a blueprint to hold them accountable, to hold their feet to the fire. But to me, it's never a question whether they understood the challenge. Because in a sense, this election has been unique. It's been deep state against deep state. And to that extent, then, it's not that it's for a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of, it's really the will, political will, not to make the hard decisions. Last time we were here, we talked about the first 100 days. And I think we really have something solid to hold these guys' feet to the fire. The question of how, I think, is also a very big debate.
They inherit what? Let's just call it. It's a 13 trillion shilling economy.
Right.
Don't forget about the debt part. Let's look at the positives.
Can you?
They inherited 13 trillion shilling economy.
All right.
The regional hub, financial hub, the regional economic hub, the regional peace hub. Okay? So there are some very many positives that they are coming and inheriting.
Yes.
And then there's that little matter of, the global landscape and everything that's happening around the world at present.
Yeah.
And what it's doing to domestic economies.
True.
There's that. So there's the international pressure.
Right.
And then there's the domestic pressure of debt and everybody that we owe money, and they'll be coming and saying, wewe, wajua ule jamaa mwingine hapo amenilipa rent ya last month. Umekalia deposit. So how do they manage this as soon as they take up office?
Well, I see for both of them, the critical things that come out, that stand out for me, is coming with no headroom as far as the budget is concerned. So short of some fairly drastic decisions, and that's why I keep coming back to the 100 days, that's when we'll see whether they're serious about funding their promises. Their promises are extraordinarily expensive. And there's no way you can finance that with a run-of-the-mill, same type of budget year after year. And so it's for that I say that it's good to hear two radical revolutions that are going to happen. One is going to be around government expenditure and how it goes about financing it. And the other one is that for both manifestos, you see there's a very clear move away from big infrastructure to the mwananchi. Like it or not, on one party, I think sort of created the momentum and forced the conversation to be back to the Kenyan. And how's the Kenyan going to do well? And in that space, they better get on with delivering this thing, because I don't think Kenyans will take much of a continued status quo conversation. Clearly.
Yesterday we had a conversation about the expectation and looking at expectation vis-a-vis the outcomes that we are currently seeing now with the results. And the question is, are we seeing this rabid attention being paid to the results because there's an expectation of a delivery of a promise that was made pre-election? Or are we just seeing that it's your person and you're emotionally vested? So that's what you're looking at. So when we're looking at an economy, when we're looking at certain things, your daily bread and butter that needs to be delivered by this would-be leader, it then becomes important in terms of how then this is going to be delivered. With what we are seeing today, with what we are seeing in the anticipation to these results, from your point of view, is it an anticipation of how things will be better economically, hoping that your would-be leader would come into this position?
You know, even beyond our particular commitments to our leaders, there's a new ingredient in this debate, in this election this time. It's actually been a class warfare conversation. We've never had that in this country. At least we've never had it at this intensity. And so the danger is even where you promise, and I think both sides have this, there's an element of over-promising. And so the danger for them lies in, now that the promise has been made and it's in black and white and all manner of colors, delivery of it has to be seen immediately or very soon. The question that no one, I think it's been raised a few times, but we never got a really good answer is, how are you going to fund it? And to me, only going to fund it by cutting somewhere in the first instance. And I said, last time we mentioned how we've got 600,000 public servants who basically cost us about $1 trillion to run in a country of 54 million. Huge conversation there. Second is taxation is at such levels that everyone is getting a nosebleed. Another conversation. Thirdly, of course, is the debt question. And to your question, Latif, the fact that even internationally we are a regional international hub also means that the goodwill we'll get from this, if we just continue the way and you don't get into any problems with the announcement of results, might actually be quite cataclysmic. What is a positive? Cataclysmic is negative. I don't know which is the momentous in a positive sense. If because there's so much of the international world is looking to us, and Africa is back into the Cold War scenario where it's more than one center of power in the global arena. And we are really the village beauty in this part of the world in terms of the ones they want to work with, the ones they want to woo. But whoever's coming in has to also manage that, because it can't all be debt, for example. And I can't see who's been more creative in terms of telling us how they'll fund it.
But it's an interesting Cold War when you mention it, because before it was East and West. Now it's a little more complicated.
It is.
Because there's East, yes, unless you're going to say Russia is also East. There's the US, definitely.
Yeah.
There's the UK, distinctly. There's the EU.
Right.
Yes. So even as people, yes, we call it a Cold War, like case in point, because of this Ukraine war that we have, the war on Ukraine, or should I call it this way, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, what you then find is that the Russians are now in the process of setting up a media hub in Nairobi.
True.
Yes. Now, most people do not, yes, they are setting up a media hub. Now, the closest media hub that we've had, and that did not belong to the Russians or the Americans, is in South Africa. Now, the Chinese set up a media hub here much, much earlier.
True.
Now, it tells you the thinking, but it also tells you how it is they want to be big players in the narrative that determines what it is that people see with regards to the economy, with regards to how people view politics, etc., etc.
One of the things that's really struck me this time around, and I'm a bit of a buff for historical African leaders. You look at the Samora Machels and Sankaras of this world, the sort of world they predicted and the sort of aspirations they had the likes of Russia was very involved in that sort of space. And that, in a sense, is a coming of age where Russia said, look, as Mzungu's fight in Europe, now it's every man for himself. And one thing that Russia has created that's been really fascinating for any economist watching the scene is Russia I think we probably discussed it last time.
Yes.
Russia has sort of revived the gold standard. You remember when they were boycotted by the West?
Yep.
They've basically said we're going to peg the ruble to gold and to our natural resources. Right there is such a critical and incredible new model for currency strength.
It's actually a shift.
It's a complete shift because we basically the American dollar was basically gold based.
Yeah.
Then Nixon in 1972 said no more. But you see what they did. What the clever thing they did is they switched to oil. So that's what's kept it as reserve currency. Russia has now said no. We'll go back to the gold standard, and by doing that, they're telling the rest of the world actually the reserve currency called the US is not the only way forward.
Yeah.
Now, if Africa was to learn from the Russian model, we have a revolution. Because if you're going to back your currency now with the resources under your soil, it's next to impossible to devalue you, which is what Africa has not been able to do.
How would Kenya do that? I mean, it sounds great to hear, but let's look at the Kenyan situation, obviously, which is what we are in right now. And we're saying if we're backing the Kenyan shilling with resources under Kenya's soil, what exactly does that look like?
I'd actually go this way. I'd say Kenya is a regional power, right? Kenya is the driving force behind the East African community. Kenya has recently driven and brought in, primarily, has brought in the richest country on earth called DRC. As a regional currency, was Kenya to shift its valuation to be based on the collective wealth of the East African
community.
East African community. I tell you, this thing is stronger than the US dollar. Another reason, for example, why Kenya is such a powerful currency in this market is that for us, it's a domestic currency, but it's also a regional reserve currency.
It is.
Yes. All the middle classes of East Africa, including all the presidents and elites of East Africa, all have a base in Nairobi. And now Nairobi is an international financial center. It's not by accident that the rest of the world are all based in Nairobi, because if you want to meet anyone, any of the presidents, any of the economic advisors, they'll all be in Nairobi. The question is, will Kenya dare to do that? Because you know what happens to those who try to do it. The Muammars of this world.
We're talking about very many radical revolutions. That is one. And there are very many others, even how to manage our debt and the debt levels away. First of all, by the WOHORO, do we know what our actual debt is?
Okay. The short answer is yes, but I don't think the longer answer is there are bits of it that are left out. Conservatively, I put it at 10 trillion. 10 trillion.
10 trillion conservatively.
Yes, conservatively. Probably about 12 to 13. And here's why I believe that. The IMF 2 years ago, in its visit to Nairobi, asked us to start counting three other elements of our obligations. That's called the financial obligations as part of our debt. But we were given an opportunity, a time frame within which to incorporate them. One of them was, of course, our what you call our contingent liability, our pensions that are unfunded. Second one was our debts with our parastatals, which were basically off balance sheet. And thirdly were any other financial obligations that accrue to the government but are not normally counted. For example, if you sue the government, what do you put that? And most people say, in fact, governments love to be sued, because once you get in the court system, they say it's out of our hands. Just go with the system. In fact, one of the reasons why even commercially it's changing in Kenya is now that you have the small claims court. I don't know if you follow the story of the small claims court. It's revolutionizing credit in this in market, because civil jail if you don't make payment according to the court. But because of those obligations, if you begin to include those obligations into our financial obligations as a country, then the debt so-called situation looks much worse. But I'd hasten to add that it's not just Kenya. In fact, the entirety of the world, especially the third world, is increasingly being put in a place where it has to count these other things as debt. And that creates the opportunity for us then to be put it cynically, to be managed. And I'll let that sink and go where it will go. But I think that is why it's really critical for us to start thinking of a creative way of saying, look, we've got smarts in this part of the world. We have all it takes to be a first world country as far as financial services are concerned, for example. Why isn't that talent and capability being turned around to saying, okay, let's just look at the entire economic structure of our continent, not just Kenya, and how we're going to redo it.
Well, then why do we have standouts? Why do we have, and I think there's a certain elements, I think you alluded to that just a few minutes ago. Why do we have standouts on the same continent? Just the other day we saw, for example, in Rwanda, the private education system is basically being throttled by the public system because the public system has so well developed that private schools have no business there anymore. Right. We're looking at a public transport system that has revolutionized the way Rwandese can move from point A to point B. Look at what they were able to do with COVID. Look at what they've been able to do with their economy. Look at what they've done with gender parity in government and leadership. Why do we have then standout countries that can do this on the same continent with people of the same stock, more or less? Is it not just then a decision of saying, look, this is the way we are going to go regardless?
I agree with you and do better. And that's what Rwanda is doing. But the Rwanda model is very, very different from the Kenyan model. And ours is a cacophony of noise. It's always noise. We have lots and lots of noise. Same thing West Africa, lots and lots of noise. But there's progress. Even as there's noise, I would say it's safer because it allows, there's this ability to vent. And you see from where Kenya has come, the ability for us as Kenyans to vent when we need to with no personal cost to ourselves. It's a very important part of why we have a stable democracy. Now, my worry with Rwanda is it has that, but it's bottled. It has to, a controlled economy can only go so far. And I think Ethiopia is a good example of what's happening if you don't allow that. I suppose the point is, is there a middle path between the two? And to me, the answer is yes. I'm particularly confident about Rwanda is because Rwanda has placed itself in the East African community. So there's some mitigating pressure.
Some checks and balance.
Yes, some check and balance, just in the context of the East African community. And the pressure is both ways. Because even for us, we asked the same question. We could do better. That's right. We could do better. And we see we don't need 100 years to achieve certain levels. But there's a trade-off.
You talk about the cacophony of leaders. So, because what Kenya now has with the county and devolution is that you have what is that you like calling them, CT, demigods, who are basically running a county. They're the county presidents.
That's right.
Akin to the federal system that you have in Nigeria, for example, and the same thing. So everybody has a say in terms of leadership, whereby... again, going back to the Rwanda, you have the president and you have your members of parliament, etc., etc. Now, looking at what we're looking at today with leaders in the next week or so, you will know who those new leaders are. At a time where you have this throttling debt, at a time where your overheads are through the roof, and then when development, unfortunately, is going at a snail's pace, when it should be moving a lot faster than it actually is. Do you then need leaders, whether it is at the county level or even getting more granular and then going up to the presidency? Do you need leaders right now who are going to make a decision about the positive direction in which a county, a ward, a constituency, the country ought to go, and not have this cacophony of voices when you're looking at, debilitating debt, and when you're looking at, slow development?
I tell you, there's a point at the time I would have agreed with you 100%. And because it's a straight path to development when you have a strong leader. The problem with that is that the entirety of that progress is dependent on the personality of that leader and the sort of structures is created around keeping everyone on the straight and narrow. The more untidy way is more sustainable. Because here's what's happening. Almost every election, you get 50 to 70% of the parliamentary MPs get thrown out. In fact, not MPs, everyone gets thrown out. It has a self-renewing element to it, in that you can be sure this country will always have a fresh batch of people every 5 years to just throw the whole thing up in the air. But you ask yourself, between the two parliaments, has there been movement? And almost inevitably, the answer has been yes. And to me, noisy as a cacophony of voices and arguments may be, this train is still moving. It could be moving much faster, but it's harder for it, for example, to slide back. Because every 5 years renewed to build on what was built over the last 5 years.
Are you saying that it is harder to slide back because we've hit rock bottom? So there's hardly any place to slide back towards except now where we're at.
Where you come from.
But you see, that's what you're calling rock bottom is a rock bottom that's actually lifting every time.
The bottom is moving.
But the bottom is moving
As
up.
we move.
5 years ago, for example, we didn't have much of this infrastructure, right? For good or ill, we didn't have it. Whoever's coming in comes into a new level of infrastructure.
Yep.
And they've also come in growing up, seeing that infrastructure being put together. So it's conditioning our leaders at every level that you must at least show cause for why we should elect you again. The other thing that I found really interesting this time out is some people you thought were completely established are thrown out. And very unceremoniously, right? And you ask yourself, that can only happen in a place where hata ukiwa mheshimiwa aje, there's a day of reckoning.
Yeah.
And that mentality is particularly powerful to ensuring that steady growth is happening.
But even this noise that we speak of and the issues that we consider rather painful, they are a very, very fundamental part of the growth of our understanding.
True.
If issues go to court, Okia Mtata, who's now senator, elect, and the others, civil society, I doubt if he's going to leave whatever it was he was doing. See, every time these issues come up, much as some of them are fairly repugnant, but it also enhances our knowledge of the law.
True.
And the more cases we hear, the more knowledgeable we are.
True.
You see, like now, in the past, the issues of vote rigging was something that was spoken of in whispers.
Right.
Right now, the IEBC have thrown the gauntlet and said, folks, you don't need to stress. We have a website. You want to know what's happening? Go to the website and see for yourself. We in the media are actually drawing from that particular website. So if you ask a question, the IEBC would ask, have you not looked at our website?
Have you not looked at it?
It's progress.
It is. And to me, I think that's what I was saying, we should learn to celebrate the good things, even as we are anticipating the bad things. Debt, for me, of course, is always a big thing. But what you'd ask yourself, and this is my sort of resting pace now, is saying, okay, when I was in school and I was given some money by my parents, and they said, go spend on uniform or getting shoes or something, I could come home with a very bad pair of shoes. But I didn't have evidence that I spent it on shoes. On shoes.
Yes. And the rest of the money
I didn't go to lunch.
Yes.
Now, and I know it's a very minimalist position,
Yeah.
but I'm taking the view that I will not see all the change I want in my lifetime. But I've seen sufficient change to be confident that the train is moving in the right direction. And to me, I think it's finding that balance between the two, being radical on one hand in your demands, but also celebrating whatever has been achieved so far.
But something that I've always...
Let's take a break. Let's take a break.
Let's go into the break. Yes.
So, WOHORO NDOHHO is here and he's talking about radical economic revolution. And in fact, Andrew is asking, so what do you define? How do you define this revolution? Does it involve combating state capture, impunity, entitlement? How far do you extend it? How does it manifest itself? Then how do we actually tell the result? This is as a result of what WOHORO was calling radical economic revolution. Let's discuss that after we take this break. 28 minutes to 9, Kenya's biggest conversation. It's a Situation Room with Eric Latif NDOHHO, CT Muga, and WOHORO NDOHHO. He is the CEO of Sandbox Capital and a former Director General of the Public Debt Management Office at the National Treasury. So this man knows how much we owe. And he knows.
Now this man knows how much we really owe.
What we haven't. So you see, he has told us it's between 10 and 13 trillion. It's a 13 trillion shilling economy. Gosh.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
The conversation continues with WOHORO NDOHHO. He is the CEO of Sandbox and former Director General of the Public Debt Management Office. He's telling us why we should just prepare ourselves for an economic revolution, regardless who becomes our next president or governors. What exactly do you mean by this revolution?
What I mean is that we are sitting at the cusp of not just change, but of the point where a citizenry has essentially signaled that it cannot be business as usual. And one of the things that's been very clear from both manifestos, and I encourage everyone at this point, in fact, before the announcement of who's taken the top seat, to go back and look at our two manifestos. Certain things are common between the two. And both of them refocus on the Kenyan citizen. They move away from grandiose ideas about becoming a middle-income country, very abstract notions, to the fact that the average Kenyan is in pain, as in severe pain. But the average Kenyan also is fed up with the status quo continuing. And so one of the things that you will notice from both manifestos is about 5 things that have really stood out for me. One is the whole notion of we must move the financial system in this country to be Wanjiku friendly. That should not be it should not be a peripheral issue. It should not be an NGO type space. It should be the center of government. Secondly, yes, we've done well with infrastructure, but infrastructure has not translated to welfare of our citizens. And so anyone who comes with a big plan for infrastructure is actually, Kenya has no patience anymore in that space. You can go and build on the infrastructure, but it cannot be at the center of the plank of economic planning. Third thing is that the whole notion around the efficiency of government, and the efficiency of government is going to be defined as how well it works for Wanjiku, rather than how well it works for the big end of town. And so everything from the Hustler Fund to the even there's a women's fund. Even Azimio has also a similar microfinance, micro funding for small
SMEs.
businesses. The whole notion of SMEs is really at the heart of both manifestos, and the efficiency of government will be judged against how well it serves both Wanjiku, her business, her welfare, and her health. And because of that, it means that, for example, you see in the coming administration, a lot of public funds will be set aside to directly facilitate. The question is, how are you going to, are we positioning ourselves, wherever our businesses are, to be a partner with government in that space or to benefit from that? What I particularly like about it also is that it will mean that we move away from a place of looking to, NGOs and voluntary, philanthropic endeavors, which has been what most of Africa, I could say the sickness for Africa has been just that. We look to philanthropy when we should be looking to changing the structure of government so that its primary purpose is to facilitate the citizen and not partnership with others. And then anyone who comes into this market should be, okay, right, we'll give you mining, but before we give you the mining license, how are you going to help
the local community?
We must even move away from talking about SMEs. SMEs are the majority employees in this country. It's a big end of town that's a minority. And that's what these manifestos are saying. Yes, the centrality of whatever businesses you're involved in, government is going to be about that and nothing else. And so what I'm saying is a revolution. It says, if you're smart, over the next 3 to 6 months, you better position yourself to benefit from what the government is about to do. And if you're going to ask one question about accountability, it will have to be that phrase, what Wanjiku will ask is, what have you done for me lately? On a daily basis. But for those who do, and we'll go through a list of some of the ones, I've been comparing the two manifestos and saying, okay, bottom line, where should you position yourself? If you're in business, if you're looking to go into business, where should you be positioning yourself?
If you just give us that answer just now.
No, but can I say something even before he does that? Can you tell us just how different these manifestos are? Because in my mind, they seem to be telling us the same thing, just using different words.
Truth be told, they are very similar, but they're similar in their focus. And the thing, the conversation has been driven away from grandiose plans to what have you done for Wanjiku lately. And so, to your right, to that extent, they're not very different, but it's a fact that they are converging on this question. And so, the most important, in my view, the most important responsibility for you guys in the media, and I must commend the media with it, they've run, basically, we've taken over this whole election thing, if we can continue the same accountability through the manifesto and asking specific questions around what have you done for Njeko lately, I think that's where the rubber meets the road.
Believe me, we the media could have done better.
You could.
If we could get together during the presidential debate, even in this tallying and relaying of results, we could have gotten together. My view.
True, but I'm saying because you've set a trend. My view is that the media should continue it. You should not all sit back and say, okay, we kept us and so honest. We're saying beyond keeping them honest, you're going to keep them honest every day.
Okay. Now you can answer Eric's question.
I'm in business. How do I position myself in the next 3 to 6 months?
Okay, first and foremost, the one sector we must all get to be involved in, however big or small, is agriculture.
Eric, that company does it do agriculture?
So you sold me your own land.
I don't remember.
And it was a piece of rock.
Chief, it's you who chose it. And you saw the hill and you said,
okay,
it's
boys.
gone.
Okay, boys.
Okay.
You can meet
So get into
behind the
agriculture.
classroom after this.
Get into agriculture.
Yes. Agriculture value addition, the whole notion around how you're going to
When people hear
improve
agriculture,
efficiency.
they just think, buy a piece of land and plant tomatoes.
No.
What do you mean?
I mean everything to do with value addition in that space. And I tell you, for example, if you own an acre and you keep, let's say, goats, okay? What both manifestos basically say, government will be in the business of supporting you or helping you, either with direct credit, better services, or giving you the backup for you to find good credit, good extension services. They are very clear on that. And as a convergence, it's also true that I think for especially more the Kwanzaa
Which one, yellow or blue?
the yellow
Kenya
manifesto
Kwanzaa.
is a lot more detailed how they want to do it. But it's still a whole notion that, it's not enough. The banking system as a financial sector, as it's currently structured, is completely anti-agriculture. And so the government is going to come in very big to make that a critical support, to give it critical support. So if you're going to be involved in anything to do with logistics, packaging, value addition of whatever level, consolidation, aggregation, you're in the right space. Because I think you'll be able to get both support from the government, but more importantly, both manifestos are very clear in shifting the financial sector towards those areas. But that is always contingent. There's always a caveat here. It's always contingent on whether the government will get out of borrowing locally, domestically. And they'll be fairly silent on that. One more than the other. But, the government will have to step back so that the banking sector is more involved in that. So agriculture, to me, if you own anything, let's say from 5 acres to above, the question you should be asking yourself, how do I move from whatever primary production to adding value? And then say, okay, when you go to the government website, what are they offering in that space? And get onto that bandwagon, so to speak.
The fear that I have when we start to move the conversation in that direction, WOHORO, is that those who are not in those spaces then might feel an ounce of trepidation when it comes to where they fit into a nation's development and its economy. Because then what happens to them? Where for me, that it doesn't matter the sector where you are in, as an individual in this country, forming communities and forming society, that the role of government is to make it conducive for you to operate and thrive no matter where you are.
And in a perfect world, that's true. What both manifestos are saying is that the government recognizes that. But you also, from what you're also saying, it's true that the government is imperfect and it does that. And so the government is saying, we're going to open this, and by the government, I mean both administrations, whichever comes in, is saying we're opening this as a primary priority for us. So for us as citizens is to hold them accountable to that. And one of the ways, for example, you can do is that you mentioned about aggregation of collecting, banding together as citizens. To be that's how you take care of not feeling left out. But also say for those of us who are a little more chanukad, we should be in a position of facilitating that government doing that.
How?
For example, I'll give you the example. Like in Sandbox Capital, a couple of there are many of us in the market now. We are in the business of facilitating SMEs by giving them, let's say, a one-stop shop for all their services, right? Now we want to add capital to it. So basically, an SME, if you come to me as Sandbox, I want to say, not only will I give you any experts, I'll also give you capital.
Such capital.
You're facilitating. You're not necessarily in SME yourself. Even as an SME, you can create an SME to support other SMEs. Because I think those of us who are able to do that, and I'm talking about those of us who are, probably urban, well-educated, but have no options. I'm thinking of all our graduates in this country. If you can band together to form chambers and communities and say, how can we be part of this value chain, moving this value chain forward? You may find they are far more effective at reaching the trepidatious, what do you call it, the farmer who's is worried about how they can link in.
Right.
Because these intermediaries become the ones who do the translation for government. And so to me, holding the government accountable is basically saying, what's happening with this group? Waziri, why aren't you facilitating group X, Y, Z directly? Let them tell you how they're doing it. Let them give you a phone number. Let me give you a location for these guys to go to. And then you as media, come back later and interview them and keep them, in a loop in terms of whether it's actually helping them.
Andrew has a burning question, I think, and I think also just going back to one of the things that you said before, in terms of what an economic revolution is, and if you look at economic revolutions that took place in other parts of the world, there was, at least an attempt at cutting out whatever cancer it was that was eating you up in the first place, right? For Kenya, it looks like corruption and impunity is right up there at the front. So if you're going to do anything like what we saw with the Industrial Revolution, whereby it was all right, if we're going to survive this thing, let's start making for ourselves. It doesn't matter where we are, out with the coal, in with the mechanized, and it was deliberate action in terms of what needed to be done. Now, if we're saying one of the things that eats away at economic development in Kenya is corruption and impunity, hadn't it better be that whoever comes in, even if you do have these radical ways of then making, the country move forward, then you must be just as radical in the fight against corruption?
Absolutely. In fact, I'll say my four caveats, if I came up with 5 caveats, one of them, of course, is corruption. But if you corporatize this year, it has to. But corruption is a national security issue, and we've all come to agree that. I think our fault up to this point has been we look to government and say, you eliminate corruption. You need to be accountable. The conversation needs to change to what is our citizens' responsibility in this conversation. And I think last time we mentioned how, we view as citizens demand whenever we interact with the public service that we as a public will back each other up in pushing back against any sort of demands for enticements and bribes or what have you. It has to be a two-way street. And I think we're at the right place now before the next administration comes in, whereas especially as a media and as a society, we say we ourselves are going to support each other when we interact with the public service, not to facilitate. Because remember, corruption is a two-way street.
It is, but again, it's a debate that has to be ongoing for this very reason. Every time the citizenry have taken that very decision into their hands, we've actually had revolutions, and they've been fairly bloody. You see, I think that the responsibility that the citizenry have is real, and they have not taken it up. But there is this small issue of leadership actually leading by example. I'm putting it as simply as I can, but what I mean is this. If certain basic amenities were taken for granted, or at least essentially taken for granted, these levels of corruption that we speak of, where somebody is willing to take 50 shillings, it would not only be reduced, it would be nearly eliminated, because you would not need it. That if you knew you had an opening, as you speak about the SMEs, where you could go and access money to do what you want to do, you would not need to follow someone to give you 200 shillings. You'd be busy doing the things that you need to do. So much as we take up the responsibility, and where you are right is that if we hold our leaders to account, then we force our legislators to ensure that these things actually happen so that there's facilitation.
True.
Yes.
True. But you see, as I'm saying, when you talk about leaders only implement through a system, right? We call it government machinery. And so I basically have four caveats. Of course, the first one is a peaceful transfer, acceptance and transfer of power. That's a given. But second is effective accountability. And by effective accountability, I mean this time around, let's have an effective opposition. Let's not have a situation that opposition is co-opted into government. And in that effective accountability, we must also have institutional rigor in implementation. And by that I mean these manifestos, you guys should be seeing this song every day. Who should we go to for this part of your manifesto?
You promised this.
You promise this every day. Who's doing it? Give us a name and a phone number. In fact, every time they come, you should ask them for a name, a phone number, and a location. That the people, rather than call the station, can go to that location and do that. So accountability is incredibly important. Another one I've put down as part of this revolution is that the reform of the public service, root and branch, so that it's a responsive public service. Because the public service is this. The public service is the scalpel on a surgeon's hands. The president is the surgeon, the governor is the surgeon, the implements in his hands is the machinery of government. And unless, as a public, we are going to hold that machinery accountable, evidence, part of the reason I was saying to your question, corruption is going to be where the rubber meets the road, where the public meets the public service. The public should have a view that corruption is not just unacceptable. Even if I see it next door, it's unacceptable, because if this guy next door is taking it, all of us on this side of the counter are going to suffer for it. Right? And so the reform of the public service is absolutely critical. And I say finally is that you cannot have a revolution if it is not about productivity. The fact that this day you go to a lot of towns, and I love this analogy, because to me it just captures why it's another. We're almost stillborn in some things. Whenever you go on the road and you see a Kanjo grass cutter, slasher, doing this in 2022, of course you'd ask yourself, this is a picture of Africa. When we see a peasant with a hoe, with this a djembe, that's the picture of Africa's lack of productivity. By this point, I've seen there's a few of those motorized slashers. If you begin to see lawnmowers all over the place, that's productivity. You move from slash to a lawnmower, that's productivity. When you move from a djembe to at least a rotary, that's more than the Chinese have in their millions. We should be producing them here. So the question of revolution has to be around productivity. And I'm saying even for government, if they're not in the business of productivity, then we don't have a game.
What do they do about the debt situation? Because you've said one of the things is they've got to get out of the domestic debt. If they get out of the domestic debt, they are going more into international debt. But to what extent, to what degree?
They've started the process of restructuring the debt. That's the first place you start. Get out of all expensive debt, which is an ongoing thing. And I think we need to commend, give credit where it's due. That journey to moving away from expensive commercial debt is already happening. And they're renegotiating back into low interest debt. There's always, of course, a sting in that tail, is that when you go from commercial debt, and commercial debt is wonderful if you are president, because no one asks you questions.
Accountability,
But the moment you move to low interest debt, you're going to bilateral and multilateral debt. And in that space, yes, the interest rate is very small.
But
the grace period is 10 years, but it's controlled. So it's always going to be a trade-off.
Is that a bad thing?
Well, not necessarily. I suppose because it's their money, their rules. So for me, I'll come to that part. If it means that the government gets out of borrowing domestically, and private sector gets to be done that is borrowing, even at commercial rates. Access to credit is the biggest thing. It's not even the cost of credit. It's just access. And it's the fact that if you remove government and it's then the banking sector is reoriented towards the private sector, the private sector will grow. And then the issue about taxation becomes important, because we are getting very efficient in the taxation. In fact, better than we expected. But you'd rather be that, because at least it means you're financing our own growth. But you have to get out of domestic borrowing.
We continue to watch what's happening around the country. So yes, the skirmishes at Starehe, Jamhuri High School, Starehe Constituency Tallying Center, continue. We were told earlier what happened is there are allegations of some ferried ballots in unmarked boxes. There's no answers. There's a arrest of presiding officers. There's missing papers. There's just too many things that are happening in Starehe that nobody even knows whether this is Starehe anymore. You don't even,
Kwa ufupi hakuna starehe.
Starehe iko wapi?
Hamna starehe kabisa.
And now what we're seeing on KTN News is skirmishes there. The senatorial candidate, Bishop Margaret Wanjiru, the parliamentary candidate for UDA, Simon Bogwa, the Azimio leadership, including Rachel Shebesh and the others, are all there. And they are trying to shout each other into understanding.
Isn't that a sure way to get things understood and clear? So how many people are we looking at? How many registered voters in terms of what this portends for Nairobi? Starehe is a big deal in terms of its numbers, in terms of its strategic position, right? And you can imagine why then everybody would be there. I mean, it's not your little run-of-the-mill constituency, or, you know, it's quite significant in terms of Nairobi affairs, right? Well, there you go. Amos Mwago has been declared winner in Starehe MP race, so Simon Bogwa is out of the running there. So there.
Mwago is the Jubilee guy.
And so, I mean, if any of the skirmishes led to anything, it's led to a winner, and that has been declared just now. So I don't know what the rest of you people are still doing in Starehe at this point. So that's a big question, isn't it?
It's a big one.
Yeah.
It's a big one. Nakuru, Susan Keheka, new governor. We already know Keroche, new senator. Sawa basi.
You know her name is actually Tabitha Karanja.
No, she
changed her name. She changed her name to
added
Keroche. Yes, she did.
She added Keroche is her name now. So, Siti, what's the proverb?
The proverb is that, to anyone who does not know, a small garden is a forest. It's
Sounds
not
like
that
you're
whoever
telling
does
us.
not know a small garden. No.
That person is a forest.
Hapana. Whoever does not know, hapo.
A small garden is a forest.
Yes.
Comma.
Yes.
Or semicolon.
Yes.
Sounds like you're alerting us. It's like you're saying, for all ye who don't know, a small garden is a forest.
Yeah.
But that's not what the proverb is saying.
No, that's what you
It's
are saying.
To the ignorant,
Yes.
they see a small garden
And
and
they
they
think
think
I
it's
think
a
it's
forest.
a forest.
Don't even say ignorant if they've never seen one before.
Yes.
Because if you're born in a concrete jungle in the middle of, I don't know.
Then somebody takes you to the
Islands.
Amazon for the summer.
And then someone took you to a small garden in Runda. And for the first time in your life, you're actually surrounded by
Greenery.
right?
I'm thinking of,
Any of each.
true. I'm thinking of a bonsai tree, which by the very nature is miniature. And I'm thinking of many of them together. And I'm thinking of modern environmentalists who have defined the whole idea of a forest. And we think a forest has to be acres and acres and miles of land. And they're telling you it doesn't have to. A forest doesn't have to be.
It can be many miniature trees. In
Yes,
formation.
exactly. In a formation, in a certain. It doesn't. Forget even acre. Just talk in terms
It can
of.
be a small garden.
Brother, this is a forest. This garden thing utawacha. Okay, this is just the
It
proverb.
sounds like you're the person who the proverb was referring to. To anyone who does not know, a small garden is a forest.
Yani, this lengthy explanation I have given amounts to my
You
not
still
knowing.
don't get it?
Surely.
I suppose that's what a proverb is. It just creates debate, unnecessary debate.
Too much debate for nothing. Radical economic revolution. Prepare ourselves for this. This is what WOHORO and NDOHHO is saying. Let's prepare ourselves for it. Looking at the two leading candidates and their manifesto, each of them has already shifted from what the previous two manifestos have done, or three, okay, including Mwai Kibaki's, which was let's look at infrastructure development, big development that then spurs growth and brings the growth. These manifestos are saying, okay, we are done with those infrastructure, big, giant developments. Now we're going to focus on the individual and trickling it down, bottoming it up.
Well done. Something.
One or the other.
Yes.
But the thing is, it goes down.
Well, actually, what they are saying for both manifestos, and one more than the other, but both of them essentially, they're saying, okay, we've done enough top down.
Top is yes.
So let's get government as a facilitator,
At the
right
bottom.
right at the grassroots. I'm avoiding
The
particular
bottom.
phrases. Yes.
Okay.
But consider, they're not reinventing the wheel, are they? Because the Kibaki administration did precisely this thing that is being presented in all manner of manifestos. Because the moment the so-called Mwananchi, the person who wants to be involved in SME, is able to access the means, that's it.
Absolutely.
And they were able to access it. Remember, we keep talking about
So
banks.
Kibaki was in the middle somewhere.
No.
Serving the bottom, serving the top.
Actually, it's a question of how was he effective.
Yes.
It's not how loud you are. It's how quietly effective you can be. You know, it's like a master engineer. There's a story of a master engineer who fixed steam engines, and this steam engine once stopped, and they called this old mzee, and he came with a small hammer. You heard the story. And he went. He listened. He listened. He went and he
clinked some place.
One place.
Top.
And the thing started, and he sent a bill of $10,000, I think. And the guy cries, "Why
But
$10,000?"
you only.
Yeah, you know the story. Says, "Yes, I charged you $1 for that hammer, but $9,999 for knowing where to where to hit." And to me, this whole notion around economic revival, revolution, is what Kibaki was, that sort of guy.
Yes, he was.
He just had a small hammer, but you knew where to hit.
Right.
You know, we talk about infrastructure, and it is argued that when you talk of infrastructure, most serious infrastructure that actually changes or revolutions the country doesn't take place in 10 years. It goes beyond 10, 15 years, up to 20 years. Because the blueprint has to look into the future. So, that at the same time when they were talking about bringing accessibility and ability to the common man and woman, as we call them, they were also building infrastructure. Okay, the bedrock on which economists argue is where the takeoff stage economically a country needs to position themselves in before they can actually get that done. Now, this government, to their credit, forget the cost, to their credit, carried on with that. But the idea of enabling the Mwananchi, that one, if on a scale of 1 to 10, a half, it's dismal.
Yeah, but as I said, you are living through one type of revolution. I just have to point to something else. Is Kenya, we are who we are today because at independence, we chose the right infrastructure to begin with, which was human resource. And we built human resource to a point where it's coming out of our ears. We don't know anything, what to do with it. And so when you switched 20 years ago to physical infrastructure, that's more of a catch-up. We're catching up with where we should have been with the Malaysias of this world. In fact, where we are now is where Malaysia was 20, 30 years ago. So that process will continue, but at a lower speed. But now what these manifestos they are focusing on is saying, we've had the human resource, we've done sufficient with the physical infrastructure. Now, how do you make sure that this put together benefits the grassroots? If you can't do that, then the first two will be to naught. And therefore, the question one, what I'm saying is going to be economic revolution in that. For once, both sides are agreed that the focus of government and government revenue, government largesse and government expenditure will be at the bottom. All I'm saying here is that for you to be a revolution is you out there listening should be positioning yourself to ask yourself how exactly, even these sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, tourism and digital economy, retail financial services, construction, healthcare, education, and generally in the SME, especially the bottom end of the SME, what they call the micro SMEs, mama bogas and borders. How are you preparing yourself to get involved in that, or to facilitate others who would have no idea and who would not even want to bother reading manifestos? For those of us who are so-called educated class, how are you positioning yourselves now to facilitate
To be the knowledge
government?
hub, for example.
Knowledge hub and the handholders
For everybody else.
Everyone else.
Sounds like everybody's already there. Or it's just that they're not maybe well facilitated, so they're not
That's right. The bridging
running
is poor.
faster, right?
The bridging is poor.
But there are very many people who are already in the agriculture sector, whatever level, whether it's production or value addition. There are many who are manufacturing at whatever stage they are in manufacturing. In the digital economy, there are very many who are in the digital economy, just at different stages. It sounds to me like if indeed these governments come into office and they implement what they want to implement, they'll find people who are already there.
True.
And then the people will also give them direction of this is actually what we've been doing and this is where we'd like to go. So the government then just comes and listens and facilitates and says, all right, so you have been in the digital economy and this is what you've been doing. Proceed. Go ahead and do what you need to do. What are the bottlenecks? Is it access to capital? Is it access to greater information? Is it access to services, for example, the kind of services that Sandbox offers? So here is Sandbox. You now get to know about Sandbox, link them up.
That's right.
Go on.
Something like that. In fact, to me, I was saying that in an economy like this, there are a lot of people doing that quietly anyway. The question is, and maybe this is where the media comes in, is to make sure that the hard face of government implementation is well known to you as the media and every Kenyan. But also say there's a business opportunity between what the government intends to do and what the government actually does. And to me, the revolution will come in how you position yourself in between that space. I'll give you a quick example. A lot of us keep goats, lots and lots of goats. There's this thing about the leather industry that's big now. Everyone talks about it, but no one seems to be doing anything.
Yeah.
This time round, if you look at the manifestos, they're very clear they're going to put something.
They're actually mentioning leather directly.
Directly.
Yep.
So I'd ask yourself, if you are in a livestock
Goat rearing business.
Goat rearing business, where the majority of our meat comes from, are you positioning yourself to get into collecting all those hides and skins? But not only that, do you know who you need to talk to starting next week in government?
Yeah.
Has the government given us a number? Do we as a media, are we careful to make sure the government gives a name, place, and phone number? So if you have got goat skin somewhere, I can call these guys. Because in some ways, we guarantee the implementation of the manifesto by actually believing it and calling government and saying, niko na ngozi 5,000, nazipeleka wapi?
We all go to this Mavoko place, which one of the big four projects was a tannery.
Yes.
In Athi River. So you just go there. Iko wapi ile tannery? Unajua ilikuwa flooded.
And then that's the end of
And
the
then we start that
conversation.
conversation from that point. Okay, we need this thing working. If it's not working
exactly
here,
right.
then tell us where.
Government implementation should be about citizens' activism. Yeah.
Demanding to
It
know.
cannot be that you're waiting to be told this day. Because if you ask the Meshimia 3-4 times and he can't answer, then even he knows he's not going to last very long, and that's it.
You know the thing about this development, you asked a critical question in comparing us to what is referred to as the Asian tigers. I don't know. It's odd about how countries develop and evolve. And I would argue that, yes, maybe the path we took, we could look back, because everyone is smart with hindsight. You look back and say, we would have done this. But if I look at a certain net export called a diaspora that we have in this country, okay, it means we had enough human capital. Some people don't like the term human capital, but it boils down to that, really. Your capacity to produce is capital, and if you're the one in whom it is nestled, you are precisely that. So I'm saying it means that the path we followed has extremely many benefits.
True.
But the government support that you speak of, okay, the enabling, that is partly the problem, because that same absence of it or lack of it or suppression of it is probably what led to many people leaving the country in the first place.
True. So it's become a perverse incentive. Our failure has become a perverse incentive for Africa, and that because you can't employ them, they've gone overseas. But by going overseas, the remittances have benefited us. So you could, by circular argument, you could say we should chase as many of our professionals as possible
To go.
which is crazy. Because again,
It is really crazy.
it's crazy, but that's what the logic of Africa right now, because we can't absorb them. So ask myself, for example, if you have a first-class honors in agriculture in Kenya, how many of you have a definable career in this country?
A
Very
career
few.
path with that one.
Very few. But now, if these two manifestos say that agriculture is a core of this, I'd like to know where you guys are.
Yeah.
I want to put you. I want to link you up with the minister for health, for agriculture, and I won't wait for the minister to invite me. I say, Madam Shemia, here are 20,000 graduates with even a PhD in agriculture. Use them.
But the way in which we hope things would move is that conversation then wouldn't even need to be had. You wouldn't have to go to her and say, I have 20,000. It would be clear that the environment had already developed to such a level that when you have this number of graduates, they automatically fit. In fact, they would be begging them to come. You see? And so my question is, or is that, do you think that there is the potential to have just that? That you don't have to have somebody then being because what we are seeing right now on the continent today is a repetition of the brain drain that happened in the late 80s and early 90s around the continent. That is happening today. Yeah. It's not because it's not because necessarily. I'm going to say, sometimes you say because you don't have something doesn't mean you don't like it, right? You're not going there only because the situation there is good. You're also going because the situation where you are does not offer you an alternative, right? But can we get there? What is that thing that is stopping? What is that thing that is stopping economies from saying we can produce, we can hold our own, we can hire our own, we can create environments through where our own are the experts?
And that's been what I call the journey of maturing of a country and a democracy, and we are. I strongly feel we are there now in Kenya. In that a lot of the questions, in fact, if you look at our immigration around work permits, has completely changed in the last 5 years. It's harder and harder for an expatriate to get work in Kenya because one of the first questions they ask is there no Kenyan who can do that? Who can
fit the bill? Yeah.
Because this exact same question is asked overseas.
Yep.
So it's become an international market for labor, right? Which is the other thing that works against Africa to that extent. But with that, given that we've reached that point now, we have to think of mechanisms where we are not a passive population waiting for manna from on high. And to me, the revolution is that, okay, the signals may be very powerfully sent to us that we are ready. Okay, guys, put on your shoes and get out there and say, I have this degree. Yes, not so wait for the government to say, come looking for you. Let's shout from the rooftops that we are here, we are ready. And then if it's a lie that this manifesto has been printed, then very early in this process we should know. Yeah, because we have a recall. And I know a few of us have rarely used it. We mentioned it last time. Maybe it's about time we began using the recall vote as an accountability. Correct. Yeah.
I mean, you refer to these manifestos quite often since this conversation began. So, do I assume that for you there's a believability factor in them for you that it doesn't matter who will come in, that they're actually going to do what they've said they will do?
There's a certain element of panic in our leadership this time round. And the fact that it has forced them to reorient their focus from what is to any leader. Infrastructure is very sexy because it's big, it's a monument. 10, 20 years after you've gone, you can still see the expressway. You say, I did it, But clearly, the amount of the restiveness in the population is such that it has forced this conversation to go towards that. So as far as believability, it's believable because the proletariat is unhappy. And not just unhappy, they're hopping mad. And the question is then how do you leverage that to make sure that they are also positioned to take advantage of this it's not enough to give for promises. We must hold them.
If you look at the European model of the process that we're now discussing, what eventually brought about this continued stability that we see is what we call the growth of the so-called middle class.
True.
Okay? So that there were people whose backgrounds were the proletariat, but you could see the process that they went through. And
Yes.
usually it was through education.
Education, that's right.
And Kenya has mirrored that in many ways. Because at the time of independence, literally our entire population were peasants.
Unfortunately, there are more peasants than there are at independence.
Now,
Because you're 50 million.
you've actually understood my point exactly. And I'm saying education was what now could move you from that peasantry and take you on to the next level. And we saw it doing so.
True.
Because the rewards were direct.
True.
When I graduated,
Yeah. When we graduated.
yes,
We were fast.
there were jobs. I mean, I knew where I was going to work. I knew exactly what. I mean, I had to go to the library to find out where it was actually in Kenya. But I had I had a letter telling me I had a job. Different time. But even when we talk of agriculture, remember, there are many people who can trace their wealth to basic agriculture. What they did, whether they grew maize or barley. Something then happened. The same language of revolution came in the era of the telcos. Okay? Now, that changed everything. Because overnight now, the monies that were being made in agriculture seemed like...
Nothing.
Yes, exactly. And then the communication revolution, as I call it, came in. Now, everything now really changed. And yet, the function and the importance of agriculture seem to have taken a back seat, and it shouldn't have. It should just have moved along and graduated with everything else that was happening.
True. If you move from a population of 10 million, we're adding 10 million people to our population every decade. I ask you, why is an agriculture the most lucrative business in this town?
Because
demand is growing. Yeah, demand is growing. So clearly there's a dislocation that's happened in that space.
Yep.
And I'm saying the next lot to take advantage of that. It's not going to be an easy road. I don't expect that. But if you're being told you're going to get at least access to credit, I would say start where you are. Don't go looking for big things out there. If you've got 3 acres, start there. Wherever you are, start and ask yourself, how can I get into this market? And for most of us, it's not even starting, saying, start a second hustle. Yeah. Most of us have some land somewhere. Keep goods. I don't know. Do something with the little asset you have, but start there, and let's hold the authorities' feet to the fire as far as we are concerned where we are. And that will be easier for others to follow.
So I've got this, I've got the goods, I need access to the market, I need better access to a market for everything from this animal. Not that I'm going to slaughter this animal and then throw away the horns and throw away the hide and skin. I don't know where they're going. I don't know where I'm throwing away the matumbo. So everything from this animal should translate to money. And now that is where we start demanding of the government. Start demanding of the government.
I'll give you an example that is really close to heart about agriculture, about productivity in agriculture. The cost of food. Back to the issue of cartels before. So I was talking about the restructure of government. Among the biggest, most telling revolutions that need to happen for this economic revolution to actually occur is the death of cartels. And those ones cannot happen. In fact, to me, it's one of the key accountability areas for the leadership. Is around where we as a public get to point individuals. The whole whistleblower movement. Again, it's all about accountability. Because if you break the cartel at that level, then the cost of food will fall down because it creates more opportunity for the grassroots. But again, it has to be the citizen that drives that. It cannot be just left to government. Even though both manifestos are pretty clear that they are going to go after the cartels. Yeah.
What I'm really curious, though, is that all these manifestos, as much as they're talking about agriculture being a centerpiece of their manifestos, they don't talk much about devolution and agriculture. It's like they don't seem to acknowledge that devolution will be the driver of agriculture, that the constitution has passed on that function to devolution.
They do, both of them do mention the devolution, but you're right that actually the implementation coal face is actually the county government. And the extent, in fact, one of my concerns is in the new realignment, political realignment, we are likely to actually undermine devolution if, for example, it's under monolithic national parties. For example, if you're a governor, it's actually a two-edged sword. On one hand, it will increase accountability for the governor.
Yeah.
Because if you're a UDA governor, you can get a call from State House saying, hello, what are you doing with the budget?
This is what our manifesto
But at the same time, also, it means that you're also not as free as the intent of devolution, whereas, your governor is local and answers directly to the grassroots, not to
upwards.
Someone in State House.
But the way we seem to have done that and the way we seem to have ensured control is in how we dole out the money that is supposed to go out to the counties. Yes, because, we've had governors sitting in the very seat you're sitting, and the one complaint is the money doesn't come when it's supposed to come, and that doesn't come in the amount that is supposed to come. You who has worked in that delightful ministry, how do you get to a point where we understand that amounts that are owed or should go to counties go? So it isn't whether you, who is in charge of that ministry, woke up badly or you hit your toe on something. It simply goes so that the issue about the national government being the stumbling block is removed. So you then focus on the country and say, excuse me, there really is no excuse. By the same token, how then do you ensure that when you have a budgeted amount for, say, that the judiciary, that it isn't a teeth-pulling exercise where somebody has to go and sit and smile and someone says, hey, habari ya leo, watoto hawajambo. No, you simply get your money. Yes.
Yes, and delivered in that militant tone.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fully appreciated. The truth of the matter is this: even government has something called cash flow management.
Yes.
Right.
Of course they do.
So among the unhappy consequences of having a debt that you're paying at least almost $1 trillion in interest on, is that in the order of priorities, you pay your debts first, and what's left over then gets given. The structural change in that space needs to be that, disbursements to allocation to counties should be given a priority even over the debt.
Fast charge.
I'm not so sure that we can go there, but it's part of the reason. One of the consequences of stepping back from and reforming our debt situation is precisely so that we are able to give that money to the counties.
Forgive me. I like the way you're reasoning, and just for academic purposes, it makes perfect sense.
But it's not on the ground.
No, I am thinking what you've just described is a perfect scenario of how government controls everybody. Because they are the ones who have the money, isn't it? And we know where the money is. In
And
that
the
place,
ones who know how much they have at any given time.
At any given time, the rest of us can only guess. and so whatever they tell us, we don't really have much of a choice. Budgetary constraints,
cash flow issues.
I disagree with that to this text. And I asked this question earlier. I said, Nairobi, as a international financial center, has how many financial experts?
Many.
I wouldn't know
Maybe
the
a
number,
million.
but there are many.
No, and I talked about asymmetry of information. I'm pushing that back to say it's true that the government has all of that, but none of government's revenue collection is secret. So I'm saying our pushback has to be also as part of this, as part of the answer to this thing. So let's not all just leave it to the government.
Social accountability.
We have to eliminate asymmetry, and one way we do that is I challenge the financial experts in this town to be part of the answer of this solution.
So are you saying that with that collective responsibility and pushing for certain things, then this whole idea of sirikali then disappears? Because we've had people who work in the category of social accountability sitting here and telling us a debt register in 2022, for example, we only have 2018 information, and even that
This man did not release that data when he was
ambiguous
boss of
in
that
nature. And then here you are telling us that it's very possible if a bunch of people in the numbers sector come together and push, and we push them, and then government will be able to tell us exactly what's going on.
We don't even have to push. All I'm saying is this. Let's stop being reactive and saying we have the tools right here and now. The debt register is a good example. True, the debt register has been supposed to be free for a long time. There are certain institutions that are supposed to be independent. In fact, our current constitution envisaged a semi-autonomous public debt management. Maybe we should become completely autonomous. But it's not the only one. Another question is, what should be the role of Treasury in this new dispensation? Is there an element where a part of Treasury needs to be autonomous? Probably yes, but Politically, can that be sustained? No. So then you have
not?
to take the view. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's part of the debate. To me, I'm saying they ought to be, but they almost certainly will not be because they are too central to the executive. The question that my pushback is saying is, why aren't we in a conversation of saying, rather than waiting tunaomba serikali, why don't we, as a majority, as the citizens, create a structure where we are able to monitor it ourselves and not have to wait? Because you know how we raise our money, we know how we spend our money. The question is that we don't all need to know, but there should be enough of us who know and publish it, so there's less this asymmetry. Because the fact remains that because we think it's too high level, we can't, accountability goes out the window because you're not able to. If someone has asked WOHORO today, what should we do about debt here and there? I can tell you there may be 10, 20,000 people in this town who could give you not just facts and figures, but details. And they're all in our consulting firms in this town. That part of citizens' participation is now critical. And the signal from these elections is the government is saying we are open and ready to do it. Hold them accountable to that. Okay. Don't wait for them to invite you. Invite yourself.